Perfect, we can get started. Thanks everyone for coming out to the senior last lecture. My name is Namratha and I'm the events chair of Senior Class Council. I know this isn't the way us seniors expected or wanted the year to end, but congratulations to all of us for making it. We have a few moderators that are going to be looking through the general chat, so please ask your questions in the chat, preferably not the Q&A section. We will have time after the speech for the Q&A. I have the pleasure of introducing a past professor of mine, in fact, the one who made me want to major in economics, Dr. Martha Olney. She is the chair of the Economics Undergraduate Committee and has won numerous teaching and faculty awards over the years, which probably comes as no surprise to those of you who have taken a class of hers. She is a huge supporter of Cal women's basketball and anything econ. With no further ado, I'd like to present Professor Martha Olney as this year's senior last lecture speaker.
Thank you, Namratha. Thank you very much. And thank you, I want to thank the Senior Class Council for this invitation. It's an enormous honor. I'm really humbled by it. I'm very grateful for this opportunity. Thank you. Just thank you a lot. There's several messages I want to offer to you tonight. Some of the messages I'm going to offer to you are unique to this moment because heaven knows this is not a normal spring of a senior year. And some of the messages I want to offer to you tonight are not unique to this moment, but are broader. So now, because we're on Zoom and the way Zoom works, I'm going to do this largely without slides. I will occasionally pop over to share my screen and show you a few slides that I have on PowerPoint. But by and large, because I know that when I share my screen, you see the slides and then there's a little itty bitty me, and that makes it a little less human. I thought I would leave me up so anyway, that's what I'm going to do. Now, what that means is this will be a little less smooth than usual, because I won't have my clicker behind my back to switch from one thing to the other, but we'll make it work. The chat feature is active, and if you would, you want them to ask questions in all panelists and attendees, or just all panelists?
And attendees. So we have a few members of Senior Class Council who are going to be looking through the chat and filtering through the questions.
Okay, all right. So if you have questions that come up during, you can put them in the chat. They ask that you toggle it over to all panelists and attendees. It defaults to all panelists. And then Namratha and other members of the Senior Class Council will monitor the chat. And my goal is to wrap up my comments by 7, and then we have this Zoom link until 7:30, and I can certainly take questions at that point. So with that, oh, and let me repeat that this meeting is being recorded. The recording does not record the chat, so things that you put in chat do not become part of the MP4 file, as far as I know. I actually haven't looked at an MP4 file. I think that's right. We'll assume that's right. There we go. All right, so in any case, here we go. So I want to welcome you to this, the last lecture of the academic year 2019-2020 on Friday, May 1st. 2020. I am Professor Martha Olney of the Economics Department, and I am so very grateful to be here with you tonight. The first and probably most important thing I want to say to you is don't let what's happened in spring 2020 take away your memories of the years 2016 to 2020. What we're in right now is awful. It sucks. It's terrible. It's the pits. It's rotten. There's nothing good to say about it. Graduation is canceled, commencement is canceled, senior class events are online. This is not the way your senior year was supposed to end. And, but, I'm gonna have a big but. So that's awful. That sucks, and I want to acknowledge how bad that is. It's bad for you, and I got to tell you, a lot of you know that my son is a senior in college this year as well. This is really bad for the parents as well, because we were really looking forward to commencement. So I hope that in your family you find a way to celebrate you, either on the day that would have been commencement or somehow that weekend, and still feel the joy and the celebration, even though you're not going to be on the grass in Memorial Stadium. You're not going to get either rained on or a sunburn, silver linings. Celebrate you. Make sure that you and your family find a way to celebrate you on that weekend. But what I really want you to hear is I don't want you to let these last 2 months define your college experience. These last 2 months are things you'll never forget, but don't let these last 2 months define your college experience. Your college experience is either 2 or 4 years or maybe more at Berkeley. Hold on to the memories of what came before the spring of 2020. Now, I got to admit that when I start thinking about the memories for the class of 2020, let's see, we started in the fall of 2016, and I wore a white suit to class on election day. That didn't turn out the way I had expected it to. And then we, of course, at Berkeley, we had good old Milo, and so we got to have riots again for the first time in a terribly long time. And I was actually in my office with a couple of people who I think have already graduated, I think graduated last year, getting ready for an event for the Undergraduate Women in Economics Club when that big kaboom explosion went off that was down there on Sproul Plaza. So that was memorable. And then we had the fall of, do you remember the fall of 2018? The fall of 2018 was when we had the fires. And we shut down for a while because the smoke was so bad that we couldn't breathe. And then, of course, 2019, PG&E turned off the power a few times. That was peachy. But let's put all that aside too, because yes, those things all happened during your college career, but also you learned so much and you have changed so much in your years, and the experiences that you had, those experiences, but also the experiences that you had that are unique to you, those are an important part of your college career, and you need to hold on to those memories and not let these events of spring 2020 wash away those memories that you have. Now, one of the things that you've gained, whether you know it or not, one of the things that you've gained is you have gained a great set of critical thinking skills. Now, what that means and how those manifest themselves varies somewhat by field, but I have always found a particular model of intellectual development to be really helpful in thinking about how college students evolve, because I've known some of you since you were freshmen, and you are different people today than you were when you were a freshman. And part of that is, yeah, you've taken a lot of classes and you've had a lot of experiences, but the classes you've taken, the experiences you've had, have really developed your thinking skills. So now here's where I'm going to switch over to one of my screens. Oops, I have to broaden this out. Hold on a second. So this is the non-smooth part of life. So let me go to here and let me make that bigger. Oops. Okay, let's do it. Whoa, whoa, whoa. And now, of course, my mouse has disappeared. Life in the age of COVID. There it is. Here I am. Cool. Okay. So I want to talk to you about what are called models of intellectual development. Now, these models of intellectual development, let me talk first about what it means to talk about a model. That's something very common in social sciences. It's something that's very common in sciences. So just to put a quick definition on it, if you will, the key point of a model is a model describes behavior on average, but it doesn't describe every single person's behavior. So it gives us a sense of, like, on average, for the population as a whole, these patterns are seen. And if you feel like, yeah, that's not me, that's okay, because the model doesn't have to nail every single individual, but these models, good models, do a good job of capturing on average for the economy or the population as a whole behavior. So this particular model asks, how do people engage with knowledge and learning? How are the ways that we acquire knowledge, that we understand knowledge? What are the ways in which we understand learning and the role of the teacher and the student? What I'm going to present here is a combination of two studies. One is called Perry's model, and that's work that was done by an ed psych person, William Perry, many, many moons ago. And the second is Women's Way of Knowing, and Women's Way of Knowing is a co-authored book by Mary Field Belenky as the co-author, and another set of 3 or 4 or 5 other authors. And both of these sets of researchers ask the question of, how do people engage with knowledge and learning? Now, Women's Way of Knowing came along because when Perry did his work, he interviewed essentially, well, he interviewed Harvard students in the 1950s. And Harvard students in the 1950s, as you probably know, were a particular demographic of the population. And so there was an understandable question going on further, whether or not a model that was based on interviews of people who were essentially upper middle class white men actually applied to others as well. Women's way of knowing broadened the base, broadened the study group, included women, included a broader socioeconomic status, included a broader set of racial folks from different race groups, and came to essentially the same conclusions. They used different words, but they came up with the same conclusions. And so we have this model, these models of the stages of intellectual and ethical development. This is something that I learned, oh my gosh, 1986 or so, that dates me, when I was a young assistant professor. And I was involved in a workshop for assistant professors at UMass Amherst, where I was on the faculty. And we were, there were 8 of us, and we were part of a group at UMass that also linked up with faculty at other schools as well. And we learned this as part of acquiring a set of skills to help us become better teachers. And this model, well, it radically changed how I teach. So here, let me show you what I got. So stage 1, when we're in stage 1 of these stages of intellectual and ethical development, Perry called it dualism, Belenky et al. Called it received knowledge. When we're in stage 1, we have this knowledge that there is truth. There is one right answer. There's an answer in the back of the book, x equals 13. If it doesn't equal 13, it's wrong. If it does equal 13, it's right. There's a capital T truth in the world. And that learning is about memorizing those truths. And the role of the teacher is to teach the student what the truths are. So the faculty role, the GSI role, is to tell you what are the right answers. And you'll just memorize those right answers. And that's what it means to become knowledgeable. So stage 1 perceives knowledge as being that there is this set of truths. Things are true or they are false. It's a 0-1, a dualistic view of the world. There's one right answer, not a bunch, just one right answer. And all that knowledge and learning is about is memorizing what those truths are. Stage 2, Perry called it multiplicity, and Belenky et al. Called it subjective knowledge. And in multiplicity, when we're in this multiplicity stage, we think there is no one truth. There are lots and lots of opinions, but there's no one right answer. There's your opinion, there's her opinion, there's his opinion, there's their opinion, but there's not one opinion and there's not one truth. There's no one truth. There's a lot of truths. You have your truth, I have my truth, we all have our own truths. And when students are in this stage, I have to say, when students are in this stage, what they often say to me is they come into my office and they talk for a while and I ask a few questions and I'll say, well, on the one hand, da, 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 and on the other hand, da, 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 da. And so then they look at me and they say, so it's basically, this is all bullshit. Is that what you're saying? This is just all bullshit. That's kind of what it means to be in multiplicity. To think, you know what? Everybody has their own opinion. And if I want to acquire knowledge, which I become very cynical about, if I want to acquire knowledge, I need to read the professor's mind and parrot back what the professor thinks is the truth, even if I think what the professor thinks is truth is completely crazy. But my strategy as a student is to read the prof's mind, figure out what the prof thinks, and that will become the knowledge that I'm acquiring. I was a double major in math and economics as an undergrad, but I was at a liberal arts college and I had to take humanities classes. Now, some of you know that I got away with one of my humanities classes was my logic class, which I love the fact that symbolic logic is a philosophy class because it's really just math. So that was cheating. But then I also needed to take some honest to God humanities classes. And I, as an undergraduate, I was terrified of humanities classes because I viewed analyzing a poem as my goal was to figure out what Professor, I can't remember his name, Fritz something. I was to figure out what Professor Fritz something thought about this poem. And if I could figure out what he thought about the poem, and then I wrote my paper saying what he thought about the poem, I would get an A on the paper. But if I wrote my paper and said, this poem is stupid, when he thought it was really brilliant, I would not get an A on the paper. So this is a stage that at least I recognize in myself. in terms of my understanding of literature, of poetry classes when I was an undergraduate. So that's stage 2. There's 4 stages. I don't know if I said that. Stage 3 is relativism. Perry called it relativism. Belenky et al. Called it procedural knowledge. And when we're in this stage, this is when we really develop those critical thinking skills. This is where we understand that knowledge is not one truth, that knowledge is not just a set of opinions where you have an opinion and you have an opinion and there's no way to sort between them, but that knowledge is something that's affected by assumptions. That when we say on the one hand we could argue this way and on the other hand we could argue that way, that what distinguishes one argument from another are the assumptions that we're making in those arguments. And the analytical methods that we learn are methods that allow us to compare two, in the case of econ, 2 different arguments or 2 different models or 2 different ways of understanding the world. So relativism, when we're in relativism, we understand that the role of the teacher for us as a student is to teach us the methods by which we critique a text, to teach us the methods by which we critique an article, to teach us the methods by which we replicate or critique an experiment, to teach us the methods by which we critique econometric analysis. Whatever our field is, that there are methods that are used to sort out what are good arguments and what are not so good arguments, what are solid arguments and what are not so solid arguments. Stage 3. Stage 4, Perry called it commitment in relativism, and Belenky et al. Called it constructed knowledge. In stage 4, this is writing a thesis. Stage 4 is writing a thesis. Stage 4 is I can take a stand, I can create knowledge, I can be the person who is the generator or the creator of knowledge. I can take a stand, I can bring the evidence to bear. My stand can be backed up by the evidence that I assemble, by the logic of the argument, and that's commitment in relativism. That's what, if you're doing a senior thesis, this is what you're doing. When graduate students are trying to get their PhD, this is what we need them to do. We need them to reach the point of stage 4, where they become not the consumers of knowledge, but the producers of knowledge. Now, I find this model of these 4 stages of intellectual and ethical development, as I said, I found this was transformative in terms of my teaching, because I realized that I shouldn't teach every class the same way, because not everybody is at the same point in their stages of intellectual development at all. How do I want to say that? Not everybody is at the same point in this 4-stage thing. I guess that's the end of the sentence, period, right? So that if I was teaching Econ 1 the same way that I was teaching 100B, and that was the same way that I was teaching an upper division elective, and that was the same way that I was teaching a how to do research class, and that was the same way that I was teaching a graduate class, I was messing up big time, because people were ready to learn how to do research. Well, you're not ready to learn how to do research if you still think there's only one truth. Now, the teaching piece of this, just to talk a little bit about me, the teaching piece of this is that what the goal of teaching, the goal of teaching isn't to teach you the content. The goal of teaching is to help you develop as an intellectual, help you develop as an individual, and help and to pull you, sometimes kicking and screaming, to pull you from one of these stages into the other. Right? So if you're somebody who's really comfortable with there being one right answer in the back of the book, then you're going to be really frustrated when you get to the stage where there's on the one hand this and on the other hand that, or where you're having to argue pro and con on some argument. But that's our job. Our job is to make you uncomfortable, because it's only through that discomfort that you develop and learn new ways of thinking. And I hope that you can look at this and think back to who you were when you were 18 or 19 and started college, 17 or 18 or 19 when you started college, and see that you're a different person today. That as you look at these 4 stages, it's like, damn, that's right, I did learn a lot. Not the content. Yeah, you learned a lot of content, but a lot of that content you forgot a week after the final. That's okay, we know that. You learned thinking. You learned what it means to acquire knowledge, what it means to be an expert in your field. That's what you learned. That's what we were trying to work on with you. Now, let me see. I'm rattling on too much and I'm watching my time. So let me skip back. Okay, so I'm going to stop the share for a minute so we just have me. There we are. There, I'm back. Oop, I'm almost back. This is like life in the age of Zoom. There I am. Now I'm back. Hi. Okay. So we all take those teaching skills, those learning skills, sorry, forgot what side of the aisle I'm on here. We all take those skills and we bring them to bear in whatever field that we're in. And we are, and now I want to get to the moment that we're in this crazy moment that we're all trying to live through. No matter what your field is, you've got something to contribute to this moment. You're in the arts, you're in the sciences, you're in economics, you're in sociology, you're in psychology, you're in public health, you're in epidemiology, you're in, I don't care what field that you're in. No matter what field you're in, you have something that you can bring to bear on what we're living through today. And the way that you're going to bring that to bear is going to rely on this more, if you will, more sophisticated or different level of understanding of what it means to know your field. And you're going to bring those skills to bear. Now, I'm an economist, and so I want to make sure that I do a little bit of economics in here. And so if you're not in economics, I'm definitely trying not to, this is going to be easy. Don't worry. No math. Okay. But I need to talk about the economics of this moment because you're graduating and you're worried about the job market. So I want to talk about that just a little bit before I move on to some other things. I think about this moment as having, or not this moment, but this experience that we're going through, as having 4 stages. And now I'm going to go back and share my screen again, if you don't mind. So let's see if I do that slideshow. There we go. All right, thinking about the economic moment. I think about this moment that we're in as having 4 stages, or 4 phases, either way. One is the shelter-in-place phase, and that's what we're in right now, where economic activity has stopped because we are all stuck at home in our basements. I'm in my basement. And we can't go shopping even if we want to, other than for groceries and medicines and that kind of thing. The next phase is going to be the social distancing phase. And the social distancing phase is going to last until we're all vaccinated. So the social distancing phase, and if you have younger siblings, you know that we're trying to figure out what that means in terms of UC in the fall. But the social distancing phase is not normal. So at the end of the shelter-in-place phase, we don't get to go back to the way life was in February. We go to a phase where we are masked, where we are staying 6 feet apart, where we can't be in sports arenas, and we certainly can't be in Wheeler and Pimentel and 155 Donnell and all of those other lovely spaces that you will fondly remember for the rest of your life, maybe. But that social distancing phase, that's going to last until we're all vaccinated, and that's, well, the MCB folks here can give us a better sense, and the public health folks, but my understanding is that's a while. So I've put in my head until spring 22. I don't know if that's right. It could be earlier. I hope it's earlier, but I needed to put in my head a date a long ways out so that I can be happy when it's sooner instead of a date close in and then I get depressed and because it's further out. Then we're going to have, I think, 2 post-COVID phases. I think we're going to have a PTSD phase. I think that we are going to have a period when people are when people's behavior, even once this is over, is still influenced by the trauma of having lived through these 2 years. I don't think that travel is going to return to the way it was immediately, for instance. I think that people are going to be more cautious about being in close quarters with each other. So I don't know exactly how this PTSD period is going to manifest itself, but we saw this after the Great Depression. That people's behavior doesn't return immediately to a sort of pre-trauma behavior in terms of the economy. And then eventually we'll get to whatever the new normal is. And I don't think it's going to look like the old normal, but I don't know what the new normal is going to look like. Now, the numbers that we're seeing, and you may have seen some of the numbers, and you may have done the mental health protection thing, which is a fine thing to do, and decided I'm not even going to look at the news. No. Those numbers are pretty scary, and I want to acknowledge how scary some of those numbers are. The unemployment insurance claims are pretty scary. The retail sales claims numbers are pretty scary. Next Friday, the unemployment rate numbers will come out, and that's going to be mind-boggling. What happened to GDP in the first quarter was pretty startling, and when we get the data in July for what we're in right now, it's going to be like holy camole. Those numbers are all pretty scary. But I want to say two things. One, you can't look to the Great Depression of the 1930s or the Great Recession of 2008 as good historical analogies, because those are not good historical analogies. So what we went through in 1930s, what we went through in 2008, those were downturns of the economy that were started by other factors. So financial crisis, for instance, that led to waves of layoffs, that led to people not shopping because they didn't have money. What we're going through right now is people are not shopping because we cannot go to the stores, because the stores are closed as a public health measure. And so there's not an analogy from the 1930s or the 2008 crisis for what we're going through today. Part of what that means is that when the news people say, oh my God, we haven't seen a number this bad since the 1930s, or oh my God, we haven't seen a number like this, even if we look at the 1930s, yeah, okay, fine, whatever. This is clearly going to be a more temporary downturn. My PTSD point aside, we know that there is going to be an end to this, that there will be a time when there is a vaccine. Pray for the scientists on a regular basis, if you would. There will be a time when there is a vaccine, and certainly there's going to be a time sooner than that when the shelter in place is going to end. The other thing to keep in mind is there have been tremendous fiscal policy actions coming out of Washington, D.C. that shocked me. People who are in my class this semester will tell you that in January, when the students asked me when the next recession was going to start, and I said, probably 2020, maybe 2021. And the other thing I said was, and once it starts, we're screwed, because we're going to have to rely on fiscal policy in order to get out of it. That's changes that come from Congress. And I said, can you imagine this Congress making decisions and passing a bill? So I'm thrilled that I was wrong. It's always nice to be, well, it's not always nice to be wrong, but sometimes it's nice to be wrong. I'm thrilled that I was wrong. And what it means is the really strong fiscal policy actions that they took in the first 3 or 4 bills of the CARES Act mean that the drop in spendable money for people, what economists call disposable income, the drop in spendable money is not as bad as you would think, given how bad the unemployment rate is. So the unemployment insurance is relatively generous. The payroll protection program is unprecedented in this country anyway. And so there's a lot of things that have happened to make the ongoing nature of this downturn not as bad as it would have been in either 2008 or 1930s. So that's good news. Now, the other thing, though, that I need to say is that this is going to take a while to unwind, because the first 2 phases are phases when a lot of spending that people are accustomed to doing isn't going to happen. And so, I have a niece that works for Airbnb. She's hoping that Airbnb is going to successfully pivot to having a different kind of business model and not one that's based on travel. She used to work for Virgin America Airlines. Holy cow, can you imagine trying to work for an airline right now? So there's some things where it's going to be challenging for those 2 years. And there's other types of industries where things are going to come back. But it's going to be bumpy for a while. Now, here's what I want you to take away from this. One, I'm acknowledging for you right here, this is going to be a really tough job market. That depending upon your field, this is going to be a really tough job market. And I'm really sorry that it's going to be a really tough job market, but it is. And I don't want to pretend otherwise. There may not be much of a job market, certainly while we're in the shelter-in-place phase, and the job market's going to be kind of bumpy and really scattered. The recoveries are going to be really uneven industry by industry once we're in this social distancing phase. But two things. One, this is a delay and not a permanent stop. So yeah, your job market's going to be bumpy, and you're going to be really ticked off at people who graduated last year who have these stories about what a great job market it was, and you can tell them to shut up on my behalf. I'm happy to have you say, Professor Olney said you should shut up because you're bothering me. So that's fine. Tell them to shut up. So you're going to have a much bumpier time, but this is a delay and not a permanent stop. This is not a permanent change to the way the economy is going to be. This is a delay. There's going to be a vaccine. There will be a time when we get to phase 3, and then there'll be a time when we get to phase 4. So the first thing I want you to remember is that, yeah, right now this feels awful, but do you realize it's only been 7.5 weeks since we went to remote instruction? I mean, it feels like it's been at least 7 years, if not 7 lifetimes, since we all started teaching and learning in our basements. Insane. And the first week I was doing this out of my office. So it's been 6.5 weeks since I started teaching at home. So delay, but not permanent stop. That's number one. The second thing that I desperately want you to hold on to is that this difficult job market is not about you. Now, you're going to have to work at this, but you're going to need to hold on to the knowledge that the difficult job market that you're about to go into is not about you. It's about global forces that are outside of your control. And you have to hold on to that, and you have to hold your head up, and you have to believe in yourself, and you have to know that this will eventually end. And if you have to take that and put it on a piece of paper and put it all around your room and read it every morning, if you want to put it on the mirror in the bathroom, if you want to put it on the refrigerator, if you want to put it on your parents' mirrors, remind them every day that this is not about you, do it. That this is not about you. This is about global forces beyond your control, and it's going to be bumpy. So don't internalize that. Don't take that as somehow meaning, oh, I should have, could have, didn't do, should have done. Oh, I should have done this. I should have done that. No, 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 no. This is not about you. This is a global thing that's bigger than any of us, and it's going to be bumpy for a while, but it's for a while. And it's not permanent. It's not permanent, it's for a while. It's going to be a long while. Think about how long these 7.5 weeks have been. Lord Almighty, I hope time starts to move faster. Okay, so that's what I wanted to say about the economic stuff. So let me stop the share and come back here. Okay. Now, a couple other things. Don't let spring 2020 take away your hope for the future. It's part of what I just said. Don't let spring 2020 take away your memories of the past. I just stopped sharing the screen, but I'm going to go back to it in just a sec, because I want to talk about Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's model of the stages of grief. Now, somebody's probably told you about this, the 5 stages of grief, and I think it's really relevant to what we're going through right now. So let me go back and share my screen again, even though I felt like I shouldn't do it quite so much. There it is. Okay, so here's Kubler-Ross. Make this bigger. Slideshow. It always takes a while, it makes me nervous. There we go. Okay, so I grabbed this from Wikipedia. Kubler-Ross, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross wrote a lot on grief and the cycles of grief. And so this is the standard thing. And the line is supposed to be, it's always, you know, it's like, would you label your axes, people? It makes me crazy when they don't label their axes. So time is along the horizontal axis, and how I'm feeling essentially is here along the vertical axis. And so you've got this little curve, right? And so the notion that Elizabeth Kubler-Ross had originally was that we go through these stages of grief. And the first is denial. And you can see the other words there: avoidance, confusion, elation, shock, fear. The second is anger. I have to tell you, at least, you know, for me, the fear, whoa, I don't want to show you that line yet. The fear, that was, I don't know if that's what I felt March 10th. Once we went to the shelter in place, boy, that really overtook me for about 3 weeks. So that's where I was. Then anger, which they also say frustration, irritation, and anxiety. So yep, that irritation, anxiety, that was me, definitely. Depression, overwhelmed, helplessness, hostility, flight. Bargaining, struggling to find meaning, reaching out to others, telling one story. And then acceptance, exploring options, new plan in place, moving on. So this was the way Kubler-Ross had it originally, and it was this notion that you went through each of these stages. And so you went from denial into anger, and then you'd go out of anger and into depression, and then out of depression and into bargaining, and out of bargaining into acceptance. And then other people did some subsequent work on it. So this is the, challenging the assumptions and trying to test the model. This is me, right? Which is, yep, there's these 5 stages of grief, but you don't go smoothly from denial to anger to depression to bargaining to acceptance. You kind of go womble, 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 womble. So one day you're anger, and another day you're in acceptance, and then the next day you're depressed, and the next day you're in denial, and you're just moving all around, right? So you're going every which way. And I don't know about you, but this is how I have felt since this whole thing started. I don't know if I've done acceptance much, not a lot. The bargaining, yeah, I've been doing some of that. It's like, if I put on the mask, and then can I do this if I put the mask on? Yeah, okay. So here's the reason I brought this up, is because this, first of all, I think that what we're going through, all of us are going through, are these 5 stages of grief. I think that this model, this characterization of the model, where it's just like things fly back and forth from one stage to another stage, and it's not a nice, smooth progression through these 5 stages. I think this is probably, at least for me, this is a lot more realistic and more consistent with my feelings. But the other thing I've been thinking about, and I hope this is okay to share, the other thing that I've been thinking about is to think about, I'm going to stop sharing the screen at this point, is to think about what we've been going through, and well, here, think about, I want to draw an analogy. That's what I want to do. I want to draw an analogy. And people talk about whether or not somebody had a good death. So did somebody die a good death or a bad death? And this is May 1st. My Auntie Ruth passed away on May 1st in 1998. And April and May are hard months for me, because my dad's death was on April, I forget now, April 18th in 95, and my brother died on May 24th in 96, and my aunt died on May 1st in 98, and my uncle died on April 30th. And so we just had this series of like 7 or 8 or 9 deaths that happened all between April 1st and June 1st, over about a 7 or 9 year period. It was really rough. And when people talk about, did so-and-so have a good death? I think that what distinguishes a good death from a bad death is not what the individual's gone. It's really how those of us who survived, how we felt about the process, but more it's about how long does it take for us to be able to process and package the memories of the death itself and recall the good stuff that happened before. So with my Auntie Ruth, boy, she went fast. So she was at her chorus rehearsal and she collapsed and her aorta had split, and 48 hours later she was gone. That was shocking, but it wasn't hard to then think about what a great life she'd had and what a great aunt she'd been. My mom had dementia, and she had a really awful last 3 years where she essentially lost her mind. That was a bad death. And it was bad because it was bad for her, but it's also because it took me several years. She's been gone 11 years now. It took me several years to be able to take those horrible memories of the last 3 years and process them and package them, and to be able to recall the good stuff that came before. So here's the analogy that I'm trying to draw for you, is what we're going through right now is awful. It's awful in a whole lot of different ways, and it's awful for different people in different ways. I think it's like a bad death. And I think that it's gonna make it harder to package and process what we're going through right now, and be able to find a way to process that, to set it in its proper place, and then go back and recover the good memories of what came before. But I want us to do that. I want us to remember the good stuff that was your fall for your freshman year, and your sophomore year, and your junior year, and fall of your senior year. Because there were PG&E outages, and there were fires, and there was Milo, and there was the election, but those were still good years, and there was a lot of really good stuff that happened. I mean, think about the things that you learned over those years. Think about the people that you met. Think about how your world expanded in those years. It expanded in the classroom. Grant me a little bit of that. Let's just pretend that it expanded in the classroom, and it expanded a lot outside the classroom. We always say that where you learn the most in college is outside of the classroom. I think that's true. And so what I want to also say is that we need to take this time that we have now, and we need to use this time to think about what we've lost, to think about what is it that we're grieving. Because if we can process what it is that we've lost, if we can process what it is that we're grieving, I think that's going to help us identify and understand for ourselves what's really important to us and what we want to see and experience in the future. So, for instance, yesterday was the last day of 100B, and I got really choked up. It really got to me. And I realized, I kind of realized it, but I really realized it yesterday, that I don't teach macro in order to teach you material. That's not, I mean, I love the material. I groove on this material, and I think it's really fun. But I teach in order to change lives. What I'm doing, that's why I want to show you those 4 stages of intellectual development. What I'm doing when I teach 100B is I'm taking you, sometimes kicking and screaming, from stage 2 into that stage 3. And I'm really giving you the skills with which to do that critical analysis and become an economist and do economics. I love that, But that's about changing lives. Because it's hard. Because I'm going to yank you out of a comfort zone and pull you into some place that's not comfortable, but I'm there for you, and I'm going to do that with you, and I'm going to cheer for you, and I'm going to encourage you, and I'm going to believe in you. And it is hard to do that when I'm looking at a stupid little thing. I can't even show you the thing, because if I pick up the thing to show you the thing, you can't see the thing because the thing is there. That says Logi on it. That's my webcam. I can't do that through a webcam. I can't see. I don't know who is struggling and who isn't struggling. I don't know if I'm in a moment where everybody's listening and I've got you right here, I've got you. Because sometimes in teaching, there are those moments where you've got people, where they're right there. And you can drop the pin. And it's like, wow. You can't do that in your basement. I mean, I can. I have no idea if that was effective. You may be sitting there listening to this thing on Zoom thinking, boy, that was weird. That's only, she's quite a piece of work. Yesterday helped me identify an assumption, a piece of a model of what is important to me in teaching. It helped me to identify that my role in teaching is about lives and changing lives, and you can't change lives that you can't see. I can teach material by Zoom. You can't change lives by Zoom. And it's the time that we have here to help us to understand what are the pieces, what are the assumptions, what are the parts of our lives that we didn't realize were as important as they were. I've realized human connection, casual conversation. I love it when people show up for class and say, hey, hello in the chat, because that's at least a little bit of replicating what happened in Pimentel when people would come in and I'd say, hey, and how you doing? And John Lee, it's good to see you. And Josh, what happened to your beard? I don't recognize you, and all that kind of good stuff. That human connection, the casual conversation, you can't have casual conversation by Zoom. Building community is so much harder by Zoom. So there's a lot of stuff that we have an opportunity to recognize as things that we, I guess, took for granted, things that were important in our lives, things that made life what it was, that in a way that we valued, that we don't have right now. And that's critical thinking. And who you are and what you're majoring in, you're going to come at this at different ways, right? So the social psych people are going to come at this issue a different way than the anthropology people come at it. It's a different way than the public health people come at it. It's a different way than the artists come at it. It's a different way than the engineers come at it. It's a different way than the physicists come at it, which part of campus have I forgotten, which is a different way than the literature folks come at it, and so on. We're all going to come at it in our own way, through our own lens, but we have this time to think about what we've lost and what we're grieving and why we're grieving those things and what's important and what is it that we want to see when we have that new normal. So I think it's important for you to hold on to the fact that who you are and who you have become and who you are becoming, because you are still becoming, who you are and who you have become and who you are becoming has been influenced by all of your time at Berkeley, not just these last 7 weeks, not just these last 7 weeks. Who you are and who you have become and who you are becoming has been influenced by all the time you've had at Berkeley, by the people you've met, by the thoughts that you've had, by the challenges you faced. All of that has helped to make you into the person you are and the person you are becoming. We have a lot of time now to think. And boy, I tell you, with classes ending, you and we're all going to have a whole lot more time in 2.5 weeks, or I guess it's just 2 weeks. We're going to have a lot more time in 2 weeks than we've had for a long time. Especially if you're still here in the Bay Area, we're still going to be sheltering in place even once classes have ended, and that means we're going to have a lot of time. And that's going to give us a lot of time to reflect, to think about the assumptions under which we live, it may confirm for you that you have chosen the life path that really fits you. You may, in this reflecting and thinking time, you may say, yes, I majored in whatever you majored in, and that was the right thing to do. I'm really happy with that. And you know what? You may, as a part of this reflecting and thinking and challenging assumptions period, you may say, I thought I was going to go this way with my life, but now I want to go that way. I got a lot of emails from students after the 2008 crash, people who graduated 2, 3, 5, 10 years before, who talked about how the 2008 crash made them reevaluate their lives and reevaluate what they wanted to do with their lives. And a lot of people who radically changed the whole direction of their life. This may be like that. But no matter whether you stick with the life path that you've been on, or whether you decide, no, I'm going to go this way, I'm going to change that life path, you have gained so much in your time here at Berkeley. And you'll always have that. You'll always have the memories, you'll always have the experiences that made you who you are today. It may be a bit delayed. It will be a bit delayed. It may be a bit delayed, but nevertheless, you will go out into the world. You're going to go into the world, and you're going to go into the world as a golden bear. You're going to go into the world as a Berkeley grad. You're going to embody the ethos that is Berkeley, and that ethos is to use your skills and your knowledge and your passion to make the world a better place. That's what it means to be a golden bear, to use your skills and your knowledge and your passion to make the world a better place. So go forth, go forth. Go forth into the world. You're a golden bear. Go make it a better world. And go Bears. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that incredible speech, Professor Olney. So anyone who wants to ask questions, please feel free to put that in. We do have one question already from Noah Alkis. Professor Olney, do you think it's possible we see a stratification of society into those who have been infected and now are immune, thus able to work and move freely, and those who are not immune?
You know, I'm not a public health or an epidemiologist, so I think this is a little bit out of my field. My understanding from what I've heard and read in the news is that we don't know that people who have been sick have immunity. So, but I refer you to the scientists.
From Anna Bernick, what has been one thing you've realized in your post-college life, and how did you address it?
Oh my goodness. Wow. That's a broad question. Do you have a specific, Anna, do you have a specific sort of way you want me to go with that? You put it in chat because I can see the chat. I mean, I have one thought, but I don't know if you wanted me to go down a particular road or she's typing. Let me give Anna a sec to type. One of the things I realized is you ask a question, you got to give people a chance to type because people can't type as fast as you can talk. So there's a no there. Okay. I spent a long time figuring out what I wanted to be. Now, in one sense, I didn't. So I graduated college at 21 and went straight to graduate school, started graduate school at 21, and I got my PhD, and I started my first job when I was, I think, 27, teaching at UMass Amherst. But I was in my 40s before I was in my 30s. I was in my 30s before I fully embraced this as a career. I sort of always had this like, I'll do this until I change my mind and decide I'm going to do something else. And we had, some of you know that my wife is a minister, retired minister. And so through the church, we had a group of us who were all kind of adrift in terms of who we wanted to be and what we wanted to be and what our careers paths were. I'm going to take my glasses off. I need to be able to see to do this. So I think we call it the employment group or something like that. And so we had one night when we met upstairs in our house. The task that night was we were going to go around the group and each person had to not talk, and everybody else in the group, there were 4 people in the group, everybody else in the group had to say who they saw you as, right? So Roger was one of the people in the group, and he was trying to decide whether he really wanted to be a pastor or not. And he was a pastor down to his bones. And so we always like, Roger, you're a pastor. And they got to me and I'm like, oh, I don't know, maybe I'll quit this whole gig. I can work in the city. I can do consulting. Maybe I'll teach high school. I don't know. Maybe I'll drive a bus. What am I going to do? And every person, we went around the room and every person said, you are a teacher. You are called to be a teacher. This is who you're called to be. And it was only when my friends who knew me, who said that to me, that I became eventually able to embrace that as my calling. But it was not, I didn't figure that out when I was 21. I didn't figure that out when I got tenure at UMass. You know, this was after I had left a tenured job at UMass and moved back out here to Berkeley, and it was really my friend saying, God has called you to be a teacher, and I had to sit up and listen. So I don't know if that was your question, Anna, but all right.
Okay, from Rishabh Srivastava, how do you continue challenging yourself intellectually and otherwise once you leave the academic atmosphere?
Oh, I don't know. Golly, you know, classes just ended yesterday. And one of the things that teaching from home has been about for me is sort of looking ahead to retirement and thinking about what is my day-to-day life going to be like, because I haven't had time to think about that. I haven't planned that out yet. I don't know yet. I'll figure something out. Ask me in 2 years.
From Howard Kate, what piece of advice would you give yourself if you were at our stage of life, knowing what you know now?
Be self-forgiving. That we tend to be harder on ourselves than anybody else would be on us. That what seems like an immediate problem in the grand scheme of things will become smaller. That your 20s are bumpy anyway. So this is going to be bumpy because of what we're going through, but your 21 to 26 or so age, that's a really bumpy time. And so you got to do a lot of self-forgiveness in the next 4 or 5 years. And it's really bumpy because as much as you feel like your identity has been developed over the last 3.5 years here at Berkeley, that process is really going to take on, that process is going to continue over the next 4 or 5 years. Yeah, so self-forgiveness, yeah. Drink good bourbon, not bad bourbon. Don't drink liquor that gives you a hangover. Drink good stuff.
From Erica Xiao, what's been a memorable moment of teaching and interaction you've had with the class of 2020?
You know, running through this list of things that we've lived through together, I think, I don't know which classes y'all were in. So the fall of 2016, you were freshmen, so you probably weren't in Econ 1 because that's mostly sophomores. That was something else. The fall of 2017, was that when the riot was, or was that spring of 2018? I forget when the riot was. I don't remember. It was dark. I remember it was in the winter, so maybe it was like January, February. That was awful. I think, oh gosh, memorable time. I mean, I think that what we're going through right now is probably going to stand out the most. One of the things that I try to do is to try to offer you ways to get through difficult times. And there's been a lot of those in the last decade. I didn't look it up. I don't think it was your class. I think it was the class before you when we had the summer when there was 2 people who were killed, one in Nice, France, and one in, I forget where, in Bangladesh, in terrorist attacks. Was that you guys, or was that the class before you?
I think it was our class.
Mm-hmm. Was that your class? Yeah. That was hard. So, sorry. Next.
From Ulysses Attilano, congratulations on your retirement. What are your plans moving forward? Do you plan to publish a new textbook? Have more family time? Plan a vacation after COVID?
Ulysses, I'm definitely planning a vacation. We were planning, yes, definitely vacations. So my wife and I have done several vacations with what's called Olivia Travel, which is a travel company for lesbians, and love it, but can't do it again until spring 22. So that's definitely on the agenda. There's, like everybody else, I have projects that I have put off. I patched the cracks in the main bathroom in 2015, and I still haven't had time to paint the bathroom. So there are projects like that I have to get to. I don't know about textbooks. I have sabbatical actually in the fall. And the project I'm going to get started on is more of a memoir / teaching tips kind of book. So I have a couple of more general interest books than textbooks that I'm going to work on. And yeah, more family time.
From Courtney Kirkland. As a fellow big women's basketball fan, a lot of my spare time and joy is spent following and supporting women's basketball.
Yeah.
How are you coping with the loss of the sport? And do you think the WNBA or the next season's college season will be able to be held in another way, i.e. without fans?
So yeah, so I think, let me do the second one first. Yes, so one of the things that was on the agenda for this summer was a lot of Aces games. So you can see on the back of my phone is my Las Vegas Aces. Which way do I have to go for that? That way. Do Hikita hold my thing. So we were planning to go to Vegas a bunch and go to the Aces games. We were pretty excited. We actually went to the Pac-12 tournament in Vegas the weekend before all of this stuff finally hit here at home. So we got back very late Sunday night, March 8th, and then it was noon, like 12 hours later was when we got that email from campus that said, well, we're moving to remote instruction. So, well, that's over. So I think that I think sporting events, until there's a vaccine, I think sporting events are going to be without fans, without in-person fans, which I think is going to be really weird in terms of sporting events. The Cal team is trying to find ways to still stay connected to the fans through Twitter and Zoom and so on. So I guess that's what's going to have to happen. But, yeah. And then I just hope the WNBA has a financial model in place to survive this, and that they're not, I worry that they're too dependent on their revenues from ticket sales, because their tickets were too expensive from ticket sales. So we'll see. But yeah, we're a little stressed. It was very exciting to watch the draft, even though it was in people's, like zooming into people's living rooms. It was like, oh, live sports, it's the draft. Okay, next.
From Shannon Hong, can you give some advice on forming a community in a time when we're all physically away from each other?
You know, I don't know, Shannon. This is something I'm going to struggle with, because I still have to teach, or will teach, I don't know, have to is the right word. I still will teach the pedagogy class. So that's where I teach the graduate students how to teach. And this is one of the things that I've set as a goal for myself over the summer, is to try to figure out, how do we form, there are people who have been teaching online for 10 years. And so they've cracked some of these nuts, and I got to talk to some of them, because we have to figure out ways to form community in the classroom when we're not physically in the classroom. I don't know how this is going to work in terms of the entering class. You know, if you're going to a graduate program, that's easier, because in a graduate program, like we have 25 students that are coming into the PhD program in the fall. And while they're not going to be able, I think with social distancing, they'll be able to be in the same place, but physically distant from each other. So they'll get to see each other and meet each other and have that three-dimensional contact with each other. I don't know what they're thinking in terms of how that's going to work with a bunch of 18-year-olds trying to move into the dorms. I mean, I've just been thinking about the elevators. You know, you can't get more than 2 people. If we have to be 6 feet apart in those Evans elevators, that's 2 people, right? You can't have even 3 people in those lovely elevators. And I would imagine, I was in the dorms, I don't know if it was unit 3 or 2, or the one that's over at Dwight in College. I lived in Griffiths for a summer when I was 16. And my recollection is those elevators are pretty dang small. So I don't know that you can have even 2 people in one of those elevators. So I don't know how they think they're going to do on campus stuff. And so I don't know how that's going to work. In terms of the rest of us, what I've been thinking about is the importance of maintaining connection with the friends I have. I've also been really aware of how hard it's going to be, like when you move to a new community, to meet new people. That if a lot of these interactions are Zoom-based interactions, those don't really lend themselves to casual conversation. So I'm sorry, I don't know. But if you figure it out, let me know, because I got to figure some of this out for teaching in the fall. Teaching pedagogy. Okay, what's up?
From Aditi Kudramoti. Sometimes we think we need to have it all figured out after graduation to land the opportunities we want. How forgiving and supportive is the real world of people who want to change direction or do not follow the paved path?
Oh, very much so. More so than your parents. The very, very much so, because so many people in the real world have done this. You know, you go and interview people who are 50 years old or so, And a whole lot of them are people who started out going this way and then turned and went that way and circled around and then went that way. And there's a lot of people who are not doing anything that's at all related to what they majored in college. And that's why, for me anyway, teaching the critical thinking skills is what's so important. Because if you learn how to think analytically, at least, you know, as a social scientist, if you learn how to think like a social scientist, if you learn how to think in that critical thinking way, you're good to go in a whole lot of fields. So absolutely, the real world is very forgiving. The real world loves people who find their passion and follow their passion. And sometimes, you know, it takes a while. That's cool. You don't have to have to.
From Jayesh Kaushik. Do you think there's some tension surrounding the fact that the only way to restart the economy is for people to risk their lives until a vaccine arrives? In other words, is it a failure of the current economic system and its architects that we have to choose between our lives and our livelihoods?
So I think it's a false dichotomy, and that's why. So you're an econ major, so let me talk econ for just a sec. And I think that's why the fiscal policy piece is so important in this, because and this is where I've been frustrated with the news media, because yes, the unemployment insurance claims are huge, right? 30 million people over the last 6 weeks. Those are people who have filed for unemployment insurance, and the unemployment insurance right now is really generous, so that if you're somebody who is making median income or below, then your unemployment insurance check will more than replace the check that you've lost. So that the livelihood, I want to distinguish between people who aren't working and people who have far less money. And I think that the government has done a far better job than I expected. Now, it doesn't mean they've done a perfect job, but they've done a far better job than I expected at providing the financial support so that the shutting of the economy didn't render people unable to buy basics or obtain basics. So don't do this dichotomy because they want you. Don't do this. Don't do this dichotomy between health and jobs. Make yourself a little triangle, and remember that there's a social safety net that goes in that triangle as well. And that what we want is to find a balance, and it's a hard balance to find, I grant you. But we want to find a balance, but we need to remember that we do have a social safety net, and we want to keep pressure on our elected officials to make sure that that social safety net takes care of people who need to be taken care of. So now that sets aside a whole separate set of issues that I don't want to take time to get into, which is about our identities and how much our identities are tied up with our work, right? So there are some people who are receiving unemployment insurance checks who have more money from the unemployment insurance than they would from working, who still say, yes, but I understand myself as a hard worker and I want to be back to work. I don't want to just have this money. I don't want to be on the dole. That's a whole separate issue, but try not to do that dichotomy. Remember that it's actually a triangle.
From Ali Lamb. I've been thinking about grad school for quite some time now, considering how throughout my entire life, it has just always been the way to go, as is seen by what's considered conventional. However, at this point, I'm so sad and burnt out, given the way I've had a very tumultuous relationship with academia, one that is associated with a lot of trauma and pain for me. What are some of your thoughts, and what would your advice be for an undergraduate experiencing major academic burnout?
Take some time. Don't go straight through. There's no reason to go straight through. Take some time and identify the source of the burnout. If you haven't, I mean, you may already have done so, but figure out, if you can, what are the pieces that cause the burnout, and then try to figure out whether those pieces would be replicated if you were in grad school, or whether there's a way to do grad school without replicating those pieces that cause the burnout. Grad school, I gotta say, when I started grad school, it was it's exhausting. Oh my God, it was exhausting. You know, and it feels like it never ends because there's so much work to do and you never can do it all. And the reading lists are, you know, they'll give you this like, you know, for tomorrow you need to read 1,000 pages. It's like, really? Do I get to sleep at all for the next 6 years? They don't really expect you to do it. They just make you feel like you ought to. But grad school also for me was the first time in my life when I really felt like I was in a community of peers, and where I was together with a lot of people who were all equally smart, and who all cared about the same subject. And there was an empowerment that came to that that was unlike anything I'd ever experienced before in my life. So it's very different than undergrad. Grad school is very different than undergrad. But I would say, you know, if you're burned out, don't go straight through. Absolutely don't go straight through. Find something else to do. Paint the bathroom. I've got one. Find some other things to do, but spend part of that time identifying what were the pieces that caused the burnout to figure out if you can not replicate that if you go to grad school.
From Yuan Tao, what are some books you consider as must-reads for everyone?
Oh, hey, you know what? I'm gonna cheat on this one. I just last night put together a list of book recommendations that the econ faculty have put together. So every econ faculty was asked to give me one book to recommend. And so I have 18 book recommendations, and I put together the web page and then sent it off to the undergraduate advising staff to have it added to the econ website. And I don't think they had a chance to get to it today. I think that whoever does the website stuff had other things to do today, but it should be ready by next week. And so there's a great set of really eclectic books there. I was really pleased with how that worked out. So I would say that the book that I put on the list was a book by Martha Olney called How the Other Half Banks. And that's a book that she's a law professor at UC Irvine, and it's a book that she wrote about the part of the population that's unbanked, that doesn't have a relationship with a bank, that uses payday lenders and check cashing outlets and so on. And I think Martha Olney's fabulous. There was a group of us read her book, The Color of Money, about the racial wealth gap as part of Econ 1 in the fall. So that's the book I put on the list. But I thought about a bunch of things. I thought about that one. I thought about Strangers in Their Own Land by Arlie Hochschild, who's one of the sociology professors here, about families in Louisiana. So that was another. But anyway, that should be ready next week.
From Emily Harari, how do you recommend getting past the not enough experience, need experience paradox or catch-22?
In terms of the job market, or in terms of like feeling confident?
I think the job market.
Part of it is one piece is being sure that you've thought about the experiences that you have and thinking about them more broadly and how they may be different than what you realized, that they may actually be relevant in a different way than you thought. So reframing the experiences you've had. And the other is, now we're back to the earlier question about remembering that what feels like a big stumbling block right now in the grand scheme of life will not be. So I don't have a good, sorry. That's all I got on that one. Pass.
From Kylie Meebust, what do you think about the government stimulus check program that excludes most college students?
Oh, well, that ticked me off because my son's a college student. So yeah, so that ticked me off. I thought that was unfair. That's what I think. It's like, I didn't get $500 for him because he's 22, and he didn't get $1,200 because he's a tax dependent. I thought that sucked. That's what I think. That's that. Next.
From Kate Montana, what is the thing you are most hopeful for moving forward into the future that lies ahead of us?
In this moment or in life? What am I most hopeful for? Wow, that's a big question.
She said in this moment.
Yeah, I was afraid of that. What am I most hopeful for in this moment? I suppose I'm hopeful. That we actually do, that people do take time to reflect and to think about life and their lives and what pieces of this, I keep hearing people say, wow, I've been home with my family and we've been having dinner together and we've been playing board games at night, and parents who are saying, gosh, I've been spending so much time with my kid, my 10-year-old, and I've gotten to know her in a whole new way. I hope that people come out of this with a appreciation for a lot of those human relationships, and find a way to hold on to the good pieces of what's happening in relationships, even once. I guess I hope that we don't get back into the same rat race. Maybe that's the way to put it. That we find a way not to get back to the same hyper insanity that I felt like we were in before.
From Benjamin Chang, what strategies do you have for building and maintaining knowledge outside of a formal academic setting?
Read, go to, depending on where you are, go to or listen to city arts and lectures, sort of things. Read outside of, don't always just read fiction, don't always just read econ. Read things that challenge you and make you think. The whole point of the Alumni Association is really a big point of it is to raise money. But another point of the Alumni Association is to provide opportunities for lifelong learning, and don't discount the good quality stuff that's in the alumni magazine that comes out every 3 months. That'll keep you really engaged in different fields. I think the problem these days is there's too much information. You have to figure out how to sort through it, and pick and choose. But there's plenty of opportunities to continue stretching your mind once you get out of this place.
From myself, what career options were you considering or paths did you take before ending up in academia? And what are the pros and cons of academia with regards to social impact?
When I started graduate school, I figured I would just take a master's and then I would go into the city. I did graduate work here at Berkeley. Then I would go into the city and be in consulting and make a lot of money. And I thought that's what I wanted to do. And then the summer after my first year of graduate school, I had a job in consulting and I hated it. It was awful. I thought it was just hocus pocus. That there was a group of 5 of us and we were forecasting containerized shipping for the American President lines, and had to just guess about things that we knew nothing about, like how stable was the government of Indonesia? I don't have a clue. And they made a multi-million-dollar decision based on this analysis. And I thought, this is just crazy. So that eliminated what I had thought was going to be my career path. And then so the story that I often tell is, when I was a little girl growing up in the 60s, if you were going to be a girl who worked, you could be a nurse or a secretary or a teacher. That was it. Those were the options. I was not going to be a nurse because I don't do blood. Everybody said, you're too smart to be a secretary. You're too smart to be a secretary. And I didn't want to be a teacher because they had given me 3 options. And so everybody says, well, you should be a teacher because you don't like blood and you're too smart to be a secretary, so you should be a teacher. And I said, I'm not going to be a teacher. You gave me 3 options. I'm going to figure out a 4th. I was ornery. And so it took me a while to embrace being a professor, which is kind of a teacher on steroids. So, I did secretarial work. I did a lot of secretarial work. So those were the kind of things that I tried. What was the end of your question?
Why did you choose this for social impact versus another career option?
So I went down this path because I started being a TA. I was good at it. I enjoyed it. I felt like I could make a difference in people's lives. I've always seen myself as that the teaching side of my career is the social value that I add to the world, and the research side is what I do for fun. So.
From Vincent Filardi, why should the incoming students register next semester for classes if everything is going to be online?
Well, they have to make that decision, right? So for some people, their alternative, they don't have an alternative. It's like, well, what are you going to do instead? Are you going to sit home and spend 12 months at home fighting with your sister? Some people, the goal is to have online courses that are almost as good as in person. We'll see. There's going to be a whole lot of resources that get thrown at that process over the summer. How many people and how many faculty take advantage of those resources, I don't know. We're still trying to figure that out. I think the social sciences, we sent out a survey the other day, and the surveys are coming back, and 2/3 of students said that even if classes are online, they're still going to sign up for classes. And then the remaining 1/3 was split about 50-50. So about 1/6 of students said, forget it, and 1/6 said, I don't know, I haven't decided. So people have reasons. I don't know. I think it's going to vary a lot from person to person.
From Kautam Uttayasurian, if you could turn back in time, what advice would you give yourself postgraduate?
I thought we did that one.
Okay, it's a similar question to someone else. And then a second question from Jayesh Kaushik. Can you comment on academia's position of privilege? How do we reconcile the lessons we have learned from our professors with the fact that the university system is an elite and sometimes out of touch institution?
Yeah. So one of the pieces I had to skip because I was watching my time was the stuff I teach about how the role of assumptions and arguments and how to critique arguments. And one of the critiques I have of a lot of academics is particularly in the social sciences, and not exclusively, but in the social sciences, when we're thinking about research questions and we're thinking about what we think, what are the factors that cause people to spend more money when they have a tax break, for instance. Most people, the assumptions that they bring to bear on that question are going to be assumptions that come from their own experience. And as long as we have an academy that is just a sliver of society, we're going to build models that only capture that sliver of society. So I strongly believe that the ticket out of this puzzle, or the ticket out of this problem, is to do what we can to diversify the academy, to diversify the faculty. That we need to have people who are bringing a different set of life experiences to bear on the questions that are being asked. I was in a seminar one time, and that was economic history seminar, and they were doing a model. They had done this study of the determinants of the number of children that a family would have. They didn't have gender in their model. That it was like they were just studying the decisions that the men made about how many children the family would have. And I'm like, excuse me, do you think maybe it's important to have gender in your model? To have like women and men and like conflict between them and how they make decisions? Oh, no. We've decided that wasn't important. It's like, okay, well, I think maybe your model's wrong. But that kind of challenging of assumptions that comes from a different set of life experiences, I think that's vital. And I think, I believe that's going to be part of this century in terms of the academy. But yeah, I absolutely acknowledge that has been missing. And we are the poorer for it. So we're almost out of time.
Yeah, last question from Erica Xiao again. What's your experience been as a queer woman in a field like economics?
Well, that's an interesting question because I'm 63 years old, And so the funny story is that when I started at UMass in 1984, and my wife and I were a new couple, and actually that picture over my shoulder was from the summer that we went to Massachusetts and moved my stuff there. We were pretty closeted because this is 1984. And at UMass, which has a lot of Marxist economists, at the time in the 1980s, the graduate students who were Marxist economists would refer to people who were not Marxist economists as straight economists. And I was at a mixer, a potluck sort of thing, after I'd been there for about 2 or 3 weeks. And one of the graduates, I'm sitting there and I'm, got my beer and I'm trying to like meet people. And this graduate student comes up to me, and we're really closeted at this point, right? I've just started my job. And this graduate student walks up to me and says, "So are you a straight economist?" I'm like, shit, oh my God, how did they know? Well, they meant, are you a Marxist economist or a non-Marxist economist? And I was like, oh, sorry. So that was interesting. My experience has largely been fine. And I think it's partly has to do with my age. I think it partly has to do with, I'm married to a Baptist minister, and it was always people who were trying to take the whole like Baptist minister lesbian thing, and that would sort of blow their minds open or apart or something, and they could never quite like move beyond the like, how do you do that? There have been, there were always people who would make assumptions, and there are still people who ask about my husband, and it's like, so I try to get my wife into the sentence earlier so I don't have to correct them about it's not a husband, it's a wife. But generally, personally for me, it's been fine. I think generally that the LGBTQ economists, I'm on the National Committee for LGBTQ economists. Generally, I think for most people, the experience is okay. There are some pockets and some universities where the answer is no, it's not okay. And there's always going to be some people who you just don't want to have as colleagues. So, but mostly it's been okay.
Awesome. Well, I think that wraps up last lecture. Thank you so much again for being our speaker.
You're welcome. It's my pleasure. Thank you very much for asking me. I really appreciate it. It's a big honor to be asked, and I really appreciate you having asked me. So I see thank yous flying by. Thank you very much. Yeah, I know there's no applauding with this. It's like, all right, I'm going to turn off the recording.